This is Jonathan Yates with the University of Iowa. Welcome to the Politics of Sports. Every 4 years, the state of Iowa goes first in voting for the President of the United States. Every day of the year, the University of Iowa is #1 when it comes to recreation and sports management, because that's the way we roll in the 319. Here with us today to talk about sports, talk about politics, and just to overall show the love to Hawkeye Nation is Representative Vicki Lensing. Representatives, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, since this is the first question, let's start off from the beginning. How'd you get your start in sports?
In sports?
In politics.
Thank you. Well, in sports, I grew up with it. I didn't participate. I'm of an age where women weren't really allowed into the sports field, but certainly with brothers and father. My father wasn't so much a fan, but my grandfather. So I grew up around sports. When you live in Iowa City, you always go to the football games. And in the 60s, when I started going, they never won, nor was the expectation they would ever win. So when they started winning under Coach Fry,
changed.
yes, it was amazing. But certainly enjoyed. We have sports everywhere. You know, my kids were in softball and t-ball, and so grew up around that. Politics was a little different. I never intended to be in politics. I think a lot of us who wind up in the State House never set out thinking this is what I'm going to do. But a friend, several friends who are my colleagues now in the House and the Senate, there was an open spot. The woman who was ahead of me retired, Representative Doder, and they said, you know, would I be interested? And I hadn't really thought about it, but they were posing to me that sometimes opportunity knocks and it chooses you, you don't choose it, and so it was worth maybe trying. So I decided, I talked to my family and my employer and employees about it, and they agreed that they'd give it a whirl. So I ran in 2000, and I have been there ever since.
And have you enjoyed your tenure in office?
For the most part, yes. You know, I think when you look and read about what's going on in the State House, the only thing that is we really do agree on probably 80% of the bills. If you look at it, the votes in the House are usually, you know, 99-1, 95-5. It's just on the really controversial things that I think get the most attention, and those are the things that are difficult, and they tend to take a lot more work and a lot more passion. But I feel my job is to represent my constituency, and in Johnson County, you know, we're a pretty verbal county, and people let you know how they feel. So I think I work pretty hard to stay aligned with them, and so I feel I do my job. I'm not always successful right now. You know, the tide has turned, and I'm in a more conservative legislature, and for a liberal county like Johnson, that can be challenging.
Has that made your job more difficult?
I think so. It's hard, you know, especially this fall. We have a lot of forums. We meet with a lot of groups who have things on their agenda that they would like to see passed. And I can listen, but the sad reality is that as a Democrat, I'm in the minority right now. And so there aren't enough Democrats to get really any initiatives that are sponsored by Democrats through. So it's hard to, you know, to listen to people and agree with them, but just tell them that probably the chances of anything, not anything, but most things, it's going to be difficult to pass right now.
Now, Representative Jim Leach, when he spoke with us, he said he was surprised to find out that many Iowa farm wives had voted for Trump when he thought surely that they would not because of his sexual misconduct that was discussed during the campaign. But when he talked to them, they said they voted for Trump because the Iowa family farm is now a LLC. And they studied Trump's tax proposals, and it was advantageous for an LLC. What would you tell the proverbial Iowa farm wife now about her vote for Trump?
Oh, I'd ask her how she feels about it now. I mean, he's been in almost a year, and really, well, we'll wait and see. I assume he'll sign his tax legislation when they put it on his desk, but he hasn't had any major legislation passed. He talks a lot and promises a lot, but I'm not sure the follow-through has been there. So when he ran on, you know, changing things, has he really changed anything, and does she still feel comfortable with her vote?
Now, what would she answer when she says, you know, net wealth in the United States is at an all-time high, $96 trillion. That came out yesterday. Stock market's at an all-time high. Housing prices are strong. GDP growth is over 3%, and unemployment's low.
But I think it was headed in that direction before he took office. So for him to claim success in his 11 months in office, for all that, I think is unfair. I think every president assumes the fruits, well, and the lemons of whatever has come before them, but I think certainly the economy was headed into a good place, and he inherited that. And I think his proposals are still unknowns. You know, we don't know how this tax proposal, we read how it's going to impact the middle class and also high wage earners. They will probably benefit the most, but it hasn't really been tested. It'll be interesting when it goes into effect. But just his stance on, on health care, and on, certainly he has an interest in those who are higher wage earners, and certainly now all the scandals that are going on in terms of the treatment of women and the sexual harassment. There are a lot of heavy issues following him, not to mention the international stage, and this latest move of him to move the capital the embassy to Jerusalem. We haven't, I think, begun to hear the pushback on that. So it's interesting. He tends to do things on his own and not consult anyone. And we weren't that kind of government before he took office. I don't think there was more engagement, and we seem to have lost that. So I would be curious if she is still comfortable with her vote.
Now, representing University of Iowa, what do you feel about his impact that will have on universities in the tax legislation, which will be severe? Everything from season ticket sales, stipends for graduate students, salaries you can pay.
I think there is an out-and-out war against public education. So from high school and grade school through public universities. And so I think we need to hang on, because I think we will see the universities suffer greatly. There isn't money at the state level, and certainly now these cuts and changes they want to make at the federal level. It's going to be really difficult for public universities like Iowa.
Now, how have you seen sports bring the community together? It's obvious that politics is dividing it, and probably will so for a long time. But in a sports state like the Hawkeye state here, how have you seen sports bring the community together as a political leader?
I think a state like Iowa, where we have no professional teams, our love in the state goes to the Cyclones and the Hawkeyes, and I suppose the Panthers, not as much in this area.
Not in this studio.
But no. And so those are the teams that I think Iowans embrace. And even my colleagues at the State House, they may not support the University of Iowa until there's a big game and the Hawkeyes are involved. And then suddenly they want tickets, absolutely. So I think it's interesting. I think people enjoy sports in Iowa. I mean, from high school on up, you see the huge support they have for high school basketball and football and baseball, and so I think they're really engaged in that. But in small towns, that's what they have. So in rural Iowa, I think that is a big deal, and it just escalates up then to the colleges. And I think the University of Iowa has a huge following, and which is nice, and people keep track of that. And so I think, it's interesting. The University of Iowa probably gets more attention from Iowans because of either sports or the hospital. I think other things they don't pay so much attention to. The research and development, maybe if it makes a headline, but I think
the writing clinic is always world regarded.
Yes, Writers' Workshop, but I think other things certainly get more attention, and sports is one of them.
Now, obviously, University of Iowa football games bring the community together. In an interview, the athletic director, Gary Barta, said it generates over $100 million in economic activity for the local community. When have you seen high school sports or things like that bring the community together?
When have I? Mm-hmm. Well, I think just in Iowa City alone. We have 3 high schools now, but when we were a year ago, when we were still at 2, you've got the City High, West High kind of rivalry. And certainly you have a lot of people who grew up and stay in Iowa City. I think people forget that some of us are locals who've been here our whole lives. And I think that carries through from generation to generation. But I think for the students, they are very invested in that. It has to do with their school pride. And then I think you see the same thing at the University of Iowa. I think university students are proud of this campus for so many reasons, either academic or sports or arts. We have a really thriving campus, and I think there are a lot of ways that way university students can be involved. I think that translates down to our high schools here in Iowa City as well.
Now, in the class I teach here, the politics of sports, the female students know so much more about sports than I do, and I've played or coached my entire life. It's been very impressive. Have you witnessed that too in your career?
Well, I think the opportunities for women in sports have changed since I was a high school student or a college student. I think women's sports has mushroomed, and certainly Christine Grant was a huge proponent of involving women in
Dr.
sports.
Grant's been very strong in Title IX.
Absolutely, and so I think women see that not only as something they've grown up with and enjoyed, but as a way to get a scholarship to further their education, or as a way to meet more people, or as a way to express themselves, and I think it's another door that's open for women that they enjoy going through.
And how's that changed since you were playing sports?
Oh my gosh, there were, it was I can't think of the word. It wasn't recognized sports. They're intramural sports for women was the only thing we had in high school. We didn't have sanctioned teams or anything like that. And basketball has changed since then. I think girls were either in basketball or volleyball. There weren't any other opportunities really. It's changed a lot.
Oh, when I was driving in last night, I was listening to the basketball game on the radio, and I also made the pilgrimage. I stopped at Rhythm City Casino. So the Supreme Court heard the legalized gambling bill. So what's your position on legalized gambling?
It's been interesting to watch because Iowa has, in the legislature the last few years, we have had bills proposed on fantasy sports that have not made it. And it's interesting to watch New Jersey and Governor Christie trying to push through what they're pushing through. And it's, I have sons who would really like to see that legalized. And I think Governor Christie is waiting for the Supreme Court to come back, but I really do think it's a federal issue on so many things. It's not, you don't want a patchwork of 50 states having 50 different rules. I really do think the federal government should weigh in. And they sort of did I think it was in '92 when they passed PAPSA and started regulating. And that's kind of the standard that states are using. But because of online betting and so many other opportunities and ways to bet, it's expanded. And I think there needs to be some clarification. So it'll be interesting where that goes. We'll see.
Do you think legalized gambling has been good for Iowa? You have casinos here, riverboats?
Well, I can't say that I'm a huge proponent of it. I hate, it's like any sin tax, I guess. I hate to believe that we're relying on that as an income generator, but most states are. It's the added revenue that they get from whatever. And I think, in terms of expanding, Cedar Rapids has wanted a casino and it just hasn't worked, and the Racing and Gaming Commission feel like we have enough. I mean, we are a small state and we have enough casinos that another one would just cannibalize what's already here. And so I don't know how much money there is to be had and how much we should expand. But also I look at the legislature and my colleagues, a lot of them oppose gambling for a variety of reasons, not just it may be personal, it may be moral, it may be religious. So and that's not a partisan issue. I think it's for a lot of them it's more personal than that. So I can't say that I have a problem with it. I just question whether this is one more step we need to go.
So in economic development overall, in which a lot of states do look at gambling, and also sports, what's your overall position on that? Others who have been on this show, they feel that Iowa just gives away way too much. For example, for the new Apple facility.
Yes,
and
in tax credits, absolutely we do. And I can't believe that companies like Apple or Microsoft wouldn't have come here anyway. They can afford to come here, so we don't need to be writing these huge checks, which is what it turns into. When we give them a tax credit, a lot of times they don't need it. And so we are giving money away that we don't need to. And we're in a state now where we don't have enough money coming in. Our revenue has been chipped away. We don't have any extra right now. And it's going to be a really tough session next session as we go to make decisions on what this state will fund and what they won't, and what services we have to cut. And I think a lot of it goes back to we have been too extravagant with our tax credits.
So what do you think the Iowa values are that attract these employers to the state?
Workforce. I mean, I think the Midwest in general, we have a good work ethic. You hire people, they show up. We don't have our minimum wage is pretty low, so they can set things accordingly. I think there are a lot of reasons like that economically why they come, and sometimes it's they need the space or they need a water supply. I mean, there's a lot of other reasons that go into it. But I think being close to other modes of transportation, we've got 35 and 80 that cross the state. So if they need, trucking coming in, lots of reasons like that we can attract. I'm just not sure the financial incentive is the main reason that they come.
And how do you see those personal Iowa values playing out in sports?
Oh, good question. Well, I think most people are fair-minded in Iowa, and so I think that bodes well in sports. I think most athletes play by the rules, want to follow the rules. They want their team to win, but they want to do it in a fair way. And I think, and I think back to when my kids were involved, soccer is, I think, where most of them started. And you occasionally had one of the parents who was just a bad fan. But for the most part, great parental support all the way along. And I think of how many parents would kind of go crazy, but make sure they got to their kids' games everywhere. And I just think because of that support by family, it's become more of a family activity. And so we're engaged early on with our kids when they're in athletics, and I think that follows through. When you look at a basketball or a football game, it's pretty close to full. People come. So I think that it's not only entertainment, but I think you're also invested. You know, we know who the players are by name. I'm sure for these kids when they're on campus to be recognized, it's got to be a crazy experience.
Now, Frederick Bachman, who's a huge sports fan, wrote the best-selling books. You know, Britt Marie was here, Beartown. He said he's a huge sports fan because you live and die every weekend. He said that's irresistible. Do you see that?
Yes, very much. I think so. Especially during the season, whether it's basketball, football, whatever, you know, people wait from weekend to weekend to get those ratings. Where are we? Who's higher than we are? Who do we need to beat? You know, I think that we really do live by it. But there again, you know, we don't have any professional teams, so we live with our college teams. That's our entertainment, and we follow them. We are dedicated to them.
Now, as a politician, how much do you appreciate that community spirit and service that sports brings?
Well, a lot. I think in Iowa City or Johnson County, I think we are, I think we're a very educated community, and we follow a lot of things, sports being one of them. And so I think most times, and also just in general conversation, Iowans can do more than talk about the weather. We can talk about sports too, or politics, all three of those things.
All in one sentence.
Yes,
I've noticed
usually.
Too, since I've been teaching here. Now, speaking of politics, you're going into session in less than a month. Do you have any personal goals, any bucket list you want to accomplish?
I would say survival is probably my main one. I think it's going to be very difficult. I don't think as difficult as last session, but I think there will be difficult issues that come up, and I think just the budget, number one, is going to be very difficult. And sadly, I think the last few years we have moved into a more partisan world, and so the issues that do come up are very divisive, and so it's hard to come to a meeting of the minds.
Well, in terms of surviving, what plans do you have for the holiday season?
Holidays are great. This year, all of my children will be home. I have a new granddaughter, and she'll be 6 months old when she comes, so it'll be very fun. Santa is definitely coming to my house.
Well, happy holidays for that.
Thank you so much.
This is Jonathan Yates, thanking you for joining us for the special Ugly Christmas Sweater edition of the Politics of Sports here at the University of Iowa. Happy holidays from the University of Iowa Department of Sports and Recreation Management. Peace be with you from the 319. Thank you.